Thank you, friends. Thanks, Daniel. Greg Phillips. I'm 1 year in Jaru from Mount Isa originally. I suppose what I want to talk to you tonight is about the difference between social justice and inclusion. So inclusion is the easy stuff, and I think Aboriginal people are categorical, and our political situation in Australia is categorically different to that of multiculturalism. The multicultural project in Australia is about being included. It's about being accepted, about adopting the rules and values of the new country, and being the same as much as possible. But hidden in that, when multicultural communities come here now, particularly communities of colour, pretty much they have a choice. And their choice is to leave their culture and values at home and to adopt the Aussie values and cultures outside of home, to be accepted. Or on the other hand, to be proud of one's culture and language at school and to get hammered for it. Now, it's not anywhere near as bad as it used to be, but this is the choice that multicultural communities or immigrant communities in Australia implicitly have to make. And I think that's unfair. I don't think they should have to. But that's a very different story for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's the same in the sense that, yes, of course, we're forced to make the same choice of leaving our values and culture at home if we want to be accepted. But the point is, this is our country. I had a bureaucrat the other day say, in the discussion, and congratulations to Daniel Andrews for talking about self-determination, and to the Minister Jill Hennessy for Aboriginal Affairs to say that she is interested in exploring what a treaty would look like in Victoria. That's a good development, a very good development. But this bureaucrat said, look, he said to a room of Aboriginal people, and he's Aboriginal, he said, listen, what you don't understand is politicians make decisions on value propositions. So all they're interested in is what's the value proposition of Aboriginal people to Victoria? As if we didn't know how government worked, he was trying to be helpful. But he said, you have to stop talking about human rights and you have to talk about your value proposition. Now, a very erudite member or participant said to him, now listen, if you follow that logic through to the null hypothesis, meaning that some politicians don't think Aboriginal people have any value to the polity in Victoria, then they get nothing, which is pretty much the situation, politically. So is that really the right question? That question presumes that white and immigrant power will always be the norm, and that Aboriginal people must simply seek to be included on those terms. And that's the difference between social justice and inclusion. Similarly, I really enjoyed the talk about the Irish Republican movement and the history there to become a republic in 1948. Constitutional recognition, and I disagree with Patrick Dodson here, he's a very good friend of mine, I look up to him and respect him a lot. But I don't think constitutional recognition is the end game. And because if we do that, what we're saying is that Aboriginal people will be included in a constitution we don't own. Or by sheer weight of numbers, we can never ever hope to have equal power in. It will be similar to the counties of Ireland seeking to be a part of the Commonwealth forever and a day, a part of the British state. That's not rights, that's not equality, that's not justice. Let me give you another example of the AFL and the Adam Goodes situation. Australia, to its credit, are finally being dragged kicking and screaming to have a mature national debate about racism in Australia. We've been very, very scared of the word racism towards Indian taxi drivers or towards newer immigrant communities of Sudanese. We're finally starting to have a little bit of a mature debate about what that might mean in Australia. Now, the AFL does inclusion really well, but the Adam Goodes incident showed us that they don't do social justice very well. They haven't thought through really what they're trying to do in the Aboriginal space. So there we were, an Indigenous round with Indigenous artwork all over the jumpers, with The Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander flags flying, welcomes to country, Aboriginal players disproportionately represented in the playing lists. That's all great. That's all good development. That's inclusion. But that's not social justice, because Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people are not included in the terms of power of the AFL. It's our game, actually. We invented it. And yet we're not on boards. We're not coaches. We don't have access to the levers of power that determine the game. You see, they want to keep us included where we're simply participants like anybody else. But those who want to keep the power keep the strings that we have no access to. That's not justice. Let me give you a parallel example. When the AFL finally realised they had a problem with sexual violence in its ranks and in the crowd, their response to that was to employ one woman. Now that's good, it was a start, but that one woman's job was not only to try and increase women's participation in boards as players, on boards and as players and as referees, but for her to do that job of inclusion, she had to actually reform the whole of the blokes culture. The unsaid normal rules of men making all the rules and women having to just slot in to those established normal rules. So actually she was being asked to do two jobs. She was asked to include women and reform men, but she was paid for one. Now a better way of doing that would be for the blokes to say, actually it's our job to look at ourselves and reform our own culture and reform our own sexism and admit it and change the way we do business so that then women actually will be more equally represented in the terms of power of the organisation. So the AFL did inclusion, it didn't do justice. And with the Adam Goodes incident, when push came to shove and the rubber hit the road and there was racism and the fans were booing, what was the AFL's response to that? Very telling. Their response, the narrative was, poor Adam, his mental health, he needs time off. Do you see how the narrative kept the problem as Aboriginal participation? That it's just Aboriginal people who are bad, mad and sad. Who if they just got better and participated on terms like us, then everything would be equal. We're here for everybody. We treat everyone the same. That, my friends, is inclusion, not social justice. And that's precisely what the Constitutional Recognition Project seeks to do. It seeks to include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in a white constitution that Aboriginal people will have no access to shared power with. That's not justice. Some will argue that's a first step. But what I'm saying is Aboriginal people are sick of the crumbs. Actually, if I were to answer that bureaucrat about what's the value proposition of Aboriginal people, what I would say is, well, actually, we're your landlords. There's a value proposition. Let's talk on those terms. So it's very easy for us to do welcomes to country and acknowledgements to country, so we should. It's kind of like we're kind of only comfortable with that if we keep our land values, house prices. If we keep the terms of power of the value of the land, we're happy to acknowledge you and welcome you into our rules. Do you see how condescending that is? Meant well, but essentially disempowering. Similarly, the Republic cannot be a project where we simply include our Aboriginal people as if we own the flora and fauna still, as if Aboriginal people are animals to be owned still, or humans to be owned. There are many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are still very uncomfortable about being called Australian citizens or Australians. Not because we seek to be, separatist or because we don't like our fellow Australians, but because that statement presumes that our sovereignty is acknowledged and equalised, and it's not yet. We essentially are a stateless people, except we're not stateless. We believe this is our sovereignty here. We do have a state, but it's an unrecognised state. Our statehood is unrecognised. Like the Irish, every generation has very clearly stated our sovereignty, one way or another. We have our own flag. We had an embassy in the 1970s. So That's actually where the debate needs to be. It needs to be not about how we can be included on normal terms that include everybody else. We're not simply another multicultural group. We want to share, we don't want to secede, we don't want to kick you all out as if that's possible. We want to actually sit down nation to nation and negotiate the terms of power. How we can share. How can Aboriginal people equally be represented in the body politic? If it's a treaty? If we were 50-50 population or thereabouts, then it would be fine to say, let's all just, have one constitution, we all just elect people and then it's shared power. But that's not the reality. A treaty is better. A treaty is a better proposition, and like I said, I congratulate the Victorian government for considering or starting to talk about that. The lessons of history would teach us that treaties are not necessarily our strongest option either. They're better than constitutional recognition. Look at the treaties of North America and New Zealand for Indigenous peoples. They're strong in the sense that they give Indigenous peoples a line in the sand to negotiate some rights and some benefits that come along with that and some negotiating power at the table. But essentially, they're still at the whim of the government of the day. The government of the day can still choose to acknowledge, uphold or ignore the treaties at their will, because the Parliament is still the ultimate power. The Treaty of Limerick, as you said, was ignored many times in Ireland. So treaties are a stronger option. That's a good idea. Yes, let's start talking about that stronger option. But there must be whole other options that we're not even considering. How can we sit down and do this properly? Now, values were mentioned tonight for the Australian nation, and I truly believe that's where we must start. We must have a truth and reconciliation commission. Not because we want to hark about the past forever and a day, but because without healing and properly lancing that boil, the boil will simply keep coming back in different forms. When we do that, when all Australians fully and truly understand what's gone on here, and Aboriginal people don't want non-Aboriginal people to be guilty just for the hell of it. We want us all to heal, because colonisation affects us all, so that we can all move on. We can grieve what we need to grieve and then leave it behind. Then we can sit down as equals and talk about values. What are the shared values of mateship and looking after the land and sustainability and innovation and all the things that actually Aboriginal people are concerned with too? But we just see it from a slightly different way. We see it from the view of sustainability, survival of the people and their relationship with the land. And that, my friends, is actually the value that the world needs at the moment. 40,000 years, you talk about why people are so stuck on the Queen is because they value ceremony, they value history. 40,000 years is pretty solid. We've got it right here and we're not even seeing it. We're not even valuing it. We don't teach Aboriginal studies K-12 properly. So of course Adam Goodes got booed. Because people don't know. We haven't taught anybody. We're here that are the educated and the initiated perhaps into Aboriginal history. But most of our students still today graduate grade 12 and come to us at university, in first year university, and we have to teach them first year who Aboriginal people are studies. Grade 1, we have to give them that in first year of university. That's a national travesty. But we can change that. So if we start there, then we can get to the national discussion about values. Then we can get to saying, okay, sustainability has got to be our goal for all of us. How do we do that? Economically, socially, environmentally. And 40,000 years, people, that's what we did. We weren't wandering around like nomads, kind of just lost and just hunting a kangaroo every now and then. 40,000 years afforded us the time to actually have all of these social systems sorted out so that men's and women's business was equally revered, for example. So I've rabbited on too long. I just think there are so many other options that we're not even discussing. And the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issue, in terms of politics, is not simply something that must be discussed within a Republic debate. It is the Republic debate. That's when we will become a mature nation. That's when we will not be scared to stand on our own 2 feet. If we don't do that, I'm afraid the Republic movement might actually just become recolonisation all over again, where we simply get included on non-Aboriginal terms. That's the risk.